The Professors is brought to you by Blackborder.com. On the site shop, you can now pre-order Rise of the Eldrazi boxes, cases, intro packs, singles, and more. So support the show and go check out Blackborder.com today. Hello everybody and welcome to yet another episode of The Professors. This week we've been graced with 24 new Rise of the Eldrazi, or RotE, as I'll be calling it in the coming weeks, of spoilers. So we'll take a look at the set's awesome limited design and surprisingly immense potential for new archetypes in every constructed format. So let's draw. On one hand, looking at the RotE spoilers is reminiscent of the days of Kamigawa. More awkward than when you bring non-kosher, chocolate-covered matzah in the shape of lingerie to a Passover dinner with your rabbi due to Kamigawa's weird mechanics that worked on the abstract subtypes of Legendary and Arcane, and the cards that made you want to keep lots of cards in your hand, or somehow make your opponent have lots of cards, or make you have no cards for some reason. And then you had this terribly awkward mana curve with 5 mana creatures and 8 mana epic spells, and, well, Eldrazi portrays this feeling with what sounds like a sub-theme of Defender, the level up mechanic that takes 7 mana spent at sorcery speed to do anything worthwhile for Standard, and Eldrazi, whose only chance outside Extended and Legacy are the Luxakian players who get their own 10 spawn generators and happen to draw into a larger Eldrazi at the right time. The problem with the cards we've seen so far for Limited is their curve, and apparent unfitting to Standard, as all they do is wait for you to get enough spawn tokens to bring out a giant Eldrazi creature. Then, if you have the removal spell, you win. If you don't, they win. This will likely result in your hand being cluttered up by 10 mana Eldrazi spells and spawn generators, while your opponent holds all but one of them, but has a 2/2 on the field that will chip 8 away from your life total before any plays. This is, well, just prolonged and boring. But as for the actual cards, let's take a look at the lower casting cost non-creature permanents. Guard Duty offers us a theme-specific pacifism for Limited that prevents an opponent's creature from attacking you in the early game, or allows your creatures to get a defender bonus from the new mana producer Overgrown Battlements. This new version of Vine Trellis, which acts as a Priest of Titania / Elvish Archdruid for defenders instead of elves, will prove certainly playable and constructed, replacing Wall of Roots, but also showing up in the Eldrazi Droid hierarchy for powering out those big annihilators in Limited. But that's all. Speaking of the droids, though, we saw our first non-colorless Eldrazi in the form of Emrakul's Hatcher. Once again, this card will play a role in the Eldrazi Limited hierarchy, but having creatures that sacrifice for mana and giving red mana acceleration is no joke either. It'll be cards like these that allow colorless Eldrazi stompers to make their way into Standard. This card plus an 8 mana Eldrazi like Ulamog's Crusher, all by turn 4 will become a viable Standard plan. Mark my words. But wait, how do you get 5 mana for the Hatcher on turn 3? The answer is Eldrazi Temple. As a sibling of Eye of Ugin, the Temple will prove incredibly useful as the Eldrazi are made just a little more viable in Standard and the format otherwise potentially slows down. I only hope that with this silliness we can have a card like this at common for the Eldrazi to be playable by all, even if the pauper level Standard players are destined to play the decks with Ulamog's Crushers instead of Kozilek's. Speaking of Ulamog's Crushers, we are introduced to our first common Eldrazi creature here with an 8/8 for 8. On one hand, it also gets an Annihilator 2 ability, making the card itself aggressively costed, but is required to attack each turn if able. Now, I'm not sure if this is necessarily a drawback, though I do like that this ability portrays a very red ability, in the form of eagerness to attack, and hope it will mark other Eldrazi as a certain color, without having colored mana in their casting cost. But speaking of giant colorless Eldrazi, well, yeah. Do you understand how ridiculous this card is? How utterly despicable it is to the cost of the abilities in Magic? Well, let's break down the colored abilities. Not being countered is worth about 1 red or green mana, according to Vexing Shusher's ability. Annihilator 6 hasn't, well, exactly been charted on a Magic card before, but we'll mark it as roughly 4 mana. The Shuffle effect is worth 1 colorless mana. The protection from colored spells is worth a little less than the Guardian of the Guildpact plus Enemy of the Guildpact abilities, so we'll mark it at about 3 colorless mana. The Time Warp effect is worth 3 colorless and 2 blue according to Time Warp, and the Jump-esque enchantment is worth 1 blue mana. Now, adding all these together, we end up with a creature that should already cost 14 mana, assuming it's like a 0/0. But no, this creature is a 15/15 that almost guarantees an end to the game. Then again, when you actually cast a 15 mana spell, which, by the way, this is only the third 15 mana spell in the game after Big Furry Monster and Mox Lotus, yes, that's how much of a joke the casting cost is, why shouldn't you be able to win the game? Well, the answer to that is you'll actually be able to cast this in Limited. Piling up mana later in the game with spawn generators like Skittering Invasion and drawing into all of the cards you need is not that likely, and yet it just makes Cancel, which has a 5 out of 7 chance of being printed in the set, by the way, against creatures like Kozilek or Virulent Swipe on that 2/2 a little, well, better on turn 12. Then again, that's why we have level up creatures to more adequately dump mana into. So, Serra Angels for 14 mana aren't so good. However, out of the 6 level up creatures we've seen thus far, I'm certain that 3 will see constructed play. Lighthouse Chronologist is blatantly unexciting as a 1/3 for 2. And Underwhelming is a 2/4 for a total of 6. However, even for 9 mana and requiring protection, 3/5s that grant free turns are really exciting. Sure, it's a mythic, so it won't show up in RotE Limited all too often, and potentially be underwhelming when it does, being that you just get an extra turn to play a land and attack for 3, then wait interminably for the time when you can cast the 15 mana spell. But in Standard, with a potentially slower format, you can protect this guy with Jace 2.0 and counterspells, allowing the turn to actually make a difference. On the other hand, a creature which acts as the anti-chronologist removal, we see Gul'Dra's Assassin. He starts early and can get big fast enough to destroy a good number of creatures. Almost everyone is skeptical of the controlling night creature's playability, as you have to dump 10 mana into it to make it good in the late game, but the thing is, that's okay. Much like when you can actually work to pay the 30 mana for Merit Lage, paying tons of mana over the course of 5 or 6 turns isn't so bad when neither player has anything else to do. Plus, slowing the game with -2/-2s allows getting the assassin to a 4/4 more advantageous in number of cards used. Our last level up creature is a divergent version of the basic Runeclaw Bear. Sure, it technically obsoletes the bear, but making it a 4/4 for a total of 5 mana, but on turn 3, makes this creature playable. But making it a 6/6 Trampler for 14 mana isn't actually that bad, when, again, you have nothing else to do. In summation, level up is something to work for that will be played in Standard. Heck, Gul'Dra's Assassin is even the buy-a-box promo, and yet, the mechanic isn't exactly what Figure of Destiny was at instant speed, and for a total of only 11 mana. Looking back at Totem Armor, we see 2 new auras which set the stage for temporary indestructibility. While none grant evasion or trample yet, I foresee ones that do in the near future, as 1 Totem Armor of each color and each rarity will surely be revealed. Our first, Hyena Armor, like Mammoth Umbra, ideally adds a Hyena creature to the one you're currently using. Just to note that a 1/1 Hyena will likely replace the 1/1 Tundra Wolves as a singular creature, as was the case with Grizzly Bears and Runeclaw Bear, and also as a creature lower on the food chain and allowing wolves to play the proper roles of 2/2s and 3/3s. But that's a Vorthosian point aside from the card's play. Boar Umbra will, at least hopefully, be the only thing Jund gets from this set, but unfortunately helps out Jund when they're playing with it and when they're playing against it. When they're playing against it, the deck has enough removal that it can remove the creature that it's being put onto. When they're playing with it, except when they're playing the mirror match, they have an easy time simply attaching the card to their creature without major interference. When the Putrid Leech is targeted by a Lightning Bolt in response, you simply pump it. When the Thrynax is targeted, you simply come back with 3 1/1s. Anti-Jund players depressed. Going back a little, as in back to a time when the color pie was irrelevant and blue had burn spells and pingers, we see a card that hilariously defies anything the color pie had set forth. But I like it. All Is Dust can work with a 20/20 Chaos Orb with Painter's Servant, but also can just be a Day of Judgment. But problem is, should a card like this be permitted and playable in mono green, a color traditionally without any control over which creatures are removed from the battlefield analogously? My answer is yes, because this card is not a white card, it's not a black card, it's not an artifact card. It's just a card that has simply ascended all colors and bypasses indestructibility and regeneration. But will it actually see play? In the Eldrazi deck, I believe so. With Eye of Ugin, it costs 5 mana and functions as a Plague Wind. Awesome. As for the colored cards Eldrazi will undoubtedly want to play, Explosive Revelation? What? Sure, this will boost the monetary value of the standard Eldrazi deck to like $1 billion, but wait, flipping up a 15 mana spell and dealing 15 damage? Game win? That's quite honestly sad. The concept that by a rough 1 in 10 chance you'll flip up something like an Emrakul and randomly pull out a win on turn 5, whereas if you flip up a Path to Exile, likely to see play in this deck because you need something to do in the early game, it's considerably less likely to win you the game, or let you get to the next turn for that matter. But as a card that offers some actual constructed viability, we see Realms Uncharted. As a card that parallels Gifts Ungiven, we get a considerably more valued control card, but allows you to only search for the card type that has become ever more important in Magic lands. You can search up the Valakut for damage to be dealt as soon as possible, the Manland to beat in for the win, or the Eldrazi Temple to pump out your colorless spells. Being an instant, it will be played in Constructed and Limited, quite a bit. Let me know your thoughts and the potential for the Eldrazi, and until next time, this is Anthony Palmerio, on behalf of the Professors. We're tapped out for now, but we'll untap soon.